Snow on the canvas, breath turning to crystals. A dozen men packed into a dark tent that creaks in the wind. So how did medieval soldiers sleep out there and wake up ready to fight? It wasn't brute toughness. It was a quiet system where you lay your body, who you lie beside what hangs above you and what never touches the ground. The warmest spot wasn't always near the flames. The smartest trick wasn't a blanket. And the thing that kept the cold from stealing your strength wasn't what you'd expect from an army on the march. We'll step inside the tent and piece it together, one clue at a time. No spoilers, just the logic that turned winter into something survivable. Tell me the exact time you're watching Dawn Watch or Midnight Guard. If this pulled you in tap, like so more people catch the full breakdown in the next episode. The first thing you notice isn't the snow, it's the silence. The kind that swallows everything, even the clank of your armor. You exhale and your breath turns to steam, curling like a ghost escaping your helmet. The battlefield is quiet tonight, but the real war is about to begin. The one between you and the cold. You thought enemies carried swords. Turns out they can also come in the shape of winter. The ground crunches under your boots, and you curse whatever medieval genius decided to wage campaigns in January. The wind slices through your cloak like a tax collector through excuses, and your fingers, what's left of their feeling, ache against the straps of your shield. You march beside a column of men who all look like half-frozen statues. No one talks much. Words take energy, and energy is warmth, and warmth is survival. The rule of the medieval winter: don't waste any of it. Your camp waits on a rise beyond the tree line, a patchwork of tents that look heroic in paintings, but smell like wet wool and despair in real life. You can almost hear some bard centuries later singing about valiant knights resting under starlit skies. Sure, he forgot to mention the part about your nose turning into an icicle and your blanket smelling like a damp sheep. And yet, this is how armies lived for months at a time. Picture the English troops during Edward III's campaigns in France, the 100 Years' War. That long, frozen argument across the Channel. They slept in field tents so thin, you could read your prayer book through them. When frost bit too deep, they'd huddle by the embers of their cooking fires, cloaks drawn tight, muttering half prayers and half insults to the weather. Some soldiers claimed that the cold killed more men than the French ever did. And you know what? They weren't wrong. Your own tent sits near the edge of the encampment, canvas stretched between poles low to the ground, flapping like it's laughing at you. You duck inside and realize just how small the world becomes once you're in it. The air smells faintly of smoke and leather, and the dirt floor already has the consistency of pudding. You stomp your boots, shake off snow, and try not to think about the fact that this shelter is only one thin sheet away from the sky. Inside, two of your comrades are already lying shoulder to shoulder wrapped in cloaks, boots still on. One snoring, the others staring at the roof as if waiting for it to collapse, because sometimes it does. A heavy gust can tear a poorly pegged tent clean out of the earth. You crawl to your bedroll, which feels less like a bed and more like an idea someone once had about comfort. The veterans joke that winter sleep in the field is a kind of spiritual experience. You leave your body behind and hope to find it still alive in the morning. There's a grim sort of truth to that. You curl up knees to chest, trying to trap whatever warmth your armor hasn't stolen. The trick, the old campaigners say, is to think of warm things, a tavern hearth, mulled wine, someone kind who once shared their cloak. You try it. It helps for maybe 3 seconds. And yet, this strange misery binds the army together. Even in the bitter dark, someone starts humming a low, shaky tune about home about spring. Another voice joins in, then another. The sound isn't beautiful, but it's human, and that's enough. For a moment, the tent feels less like a trap and more like proof that you haven't turned into part of the landscape yet. Outside, the snow begins to fall harder, thick flakes tapping against the canvas like a drummer with no sense of rhythm. The cold creeps in again, slipping under your blanket, down your neck, into your bones. You pull the hood of your cloak tighter and remind yourself that even knights, for all their shining armor and glorious banners, were just men sleeping in the dirt, wishing for dawn. Funny thing, centuries later, soldiers in World War I would still be doing the same thing, digging into the earth for warmth, layering rags, trading jokes in the dark. Different wars, same problem. You realize that technology changes faster than the human need to feel a little less cold. The wind rattles the poles. Somewhere, a horse whinnies. You shift onto your side, trying to find a spot that doesn't feel like sleeping on frozen bread. Someone in the next tent over mutters about how even hell must feel cozier than this. You grin because, for once, that sounds about right. Your eyelids grow heavy. The warmth from your body starts to fill the tiny space between blanket and ground. It's not comfort, but it's something close to peace. Out there, armies clash, kings plot, and history marches on. In here, you're just a tired human being trying to steal a few hours of warmth from a world that doesn't care. By dawn, you've discovered that sleep in a medieval winter isn't rest, it's negotiation. You wake half buried in your own breath frost, your blanket stiff as bark, and your back aching from the ground's cheerful impersonation of an anvil. The tent walls glisten with frozen condensation. Every breath that escaped you during the night has turned to ice and politely joined the structure. You push yourself upright and watch your breath fog into the air like a sigh of defeat. The camp outside is stirring men coughing, grumbling, shaking snow off their cloaks. The world has been reset to white, the kind of pale silence that almost looks peaceful, until your teeth start chattering. You step outside, and the cold slaps you in the face like an insult from God. It's time to fix the tent again. The wind last night loosened half the stakes, and the roof sagged like an old tavern keeper. You squat in the snow and hammer the wooden pegs deeper with a rock. Medieval tents, for all their romance and illuminated manuscripts, were remarkably flimsy things. A knight's pavilion might look grand, painted heraldry, colored stripes, banners fluttering, but it offered about as much insulation as a bedsheet. The average soldier's tent, even worse. A rough wedge of hemp or linen, oiled if you were lucky, and shared with 2 to 4 snoring companions who smelled like history's worst stew. Still, there was a kind of craft to it. A good soldier knew how to make earth work as part of the structure. You dig a shallow trench around the perimeter to drain melting snow. Then you pile snow along the outside walls, pressing it firm. The trick seems backward, but it works. Snow is an insulator. The same thing that freezes you can also keep you warm if you treat it with grudging respect. You duck back inside and brush frost off your gear. The tent feels marginally less doomed now. Someone once said, medieval soldiers pitched hope against weather. That's all this is, hope stitched in linen, held down by rope and prayer. When you think about it, camping hasn't changed that much. Modern hikers still fuss over angles, airflow, and ground insulation. The only difference is your tent doesn't have zippers or reflective mylar. It's pure trial and error. A knight would understand the agony of discovering your bedroll soaked through because you pitched too close to a slope. You might even find him cursing in the same way. Veterans of the old campaigns swore by certain secrets of setup. Always face the tent's opening away from the prevailing wind, unless you enjoy sleeping in a wind tunnel. Keep the walls low and tight to trap warm air. If there's no dry ground, lay down shields or planks first, then straw. The straw was sacred. It turned a mud pit into a bed, and could mean the difference between comfort and pneumonia. Sometimes they'd mix it with dried moss rushes, even horsehair, anything to keep a layer between flesh and frost. It's strange how much thought goes into simply not dying overnight. You glance at your neighbors. They're still fighting their tents, ropes, tangled poles, leaning one unfortunate soul trying to thaw his frozen gloves by breathing into them. The camp looks like a field of deflated pastries. Nearby, a sergeant walks the line, inspecting each tent with the solemnity of a priest checking confessions. Too loose, he grunts at one. Too high, you'll lose all your heat. He gestures to your handiwork, nodding once. Good. Tight walls save lives. Then he trudges off, leaving footprints that squeak in the snow. You take a moment to look at the camp, hundreds of little shapes hunched against the landscape, thin smoke threads rising into the bright morning. It's easy to romanticize it centuries later, to imagine banners waving over gallant men. But up close, it's just cold, hungry people inventing temporary homes out of fabric and faith. As you warm your hands over a small brazier, you think about the logistics behind all this. Each army marching through Europe in the Middle Ages carried not only swords, but entire mobile neighborhoods, tent makers, carpenters, blacksmiths, cooks. The English during Henry III's campaigns brought wagon loads of canvas. The Burgundians carried portable wooden frameworks. Even so, soldiers often ended up sleeping in what could only be described as creative collapses. You can't help smiling at the absurdity of it all. Centuries later, people would pay money to go camping to sleep under thin fabric in the cold for fun. They'd post pictures of it, call it escaping civilization. You suspect that if you brought a medieval archer back from the dead and told him people now choose to do this, he'd probably just walk into the nearest fire out of confusion. The wind shifts again, brushing against the tent walls with a whisper like parchment turning. You feel the cold settling back in your bones, but at least now you understand the rhythm of it. This isn't comfort. It's choreography, tent ground, straw body breath, all working together in a fragile truce. The medieval soldier's survival wasn't strength or glory. It was craftsmanship, one frostbitten knot at a time. By midday, the camp looks almost cheerful, or at least less miserable. The sun is pale and low, more decorative than useful, but it brings a faint illusion of warmth. You stomp the snow around your tent flat, trying to make it feel like a proper courtyard. The real prize of the day, though, is straw, precious, scratchy, golden straw. It's not glamorous, but it's the closest thing medieval soldiers had to a mattress. The quartermaster's boys arrive with bundles of it slung over their shoulders, trailing loose stalks like confetti. Men cheer as if treasures arrived. Fresh straw, someone yells, and suddenly everyone's volunteering for distribution duty. You grab your share and head inside, the air thick with that dry, dusty scent, somewhere between barn and bread crust. It's oddly comforting, like the smell of a working world. Here's where medieval ingenuity shines. You spread the straw evenly over the ground, thick enough to lift your sleeping body away from the freezing earth. The veterans advise layering it with a blanket on top to trap warm air pockets. You follow their lead, arranging it into a rough mound. Lying down, you realize it's not soft, but it's dry, and that's luxury enough. It's easy to forget that the ground itself is the real enemy. The earth steals heat faster than air ever could. That's why even a few inches of straw could save your life. In later centuries, armies would copy this trick using pine boughs, hay, or even horse manure as insulation. The idea is simple: don't let your skin touch what wants to kill you. Of course, straw comes with side effects. It itches, it attracts vermin, and by week's end, it smells like something alive died in it. But on the first night, it feels like heaven. You lie back, close your eyes, and for the first time since the march began, your bones stop arguing with gravity. You think about how universal this problem must have been. Romans, Crusaders, Mongol horsemen. Everyone at some point had to solve the question of how to sleep without freezing to death. The Romans used layers of reeds and wool, sometimes even warmed stones under their pallets. Mongol warriors packed dried dung beneath their felt tents for insulation and heat retention. The methods changed, but the problem didn't. A young recruit sticks his head through the tent flap, shaking snow from his hair. "You think this'll hold?" he asks, nodding at your straw bed. "I slept on bare ground last night. Thought I'd fuse to it by morning." You grin. Straw's good. Warm, dry, full of dreams. He snorts and flees. He's probably right. You'll deal with that later. As evening rolls in, the straw beds glow faintly gold under the lantern light. Men trade stories while picking hay out of their sleeves. Someone mentions Agincourt, how the English longbowmen, outnumbered and drenched in rain, supposedly slept upright against their bows, their feet in the mud, wrapped in whatever rags they had. Straw would have been a blessing, the man says. You nod. It always is. Outside, a few soldiers dig small trenches to drain melted snow, muttering curses at their frozen fingers. You hear laughter now, and then the strange, defiant kind that soldiers use to pretend the cold isn't winning. A kettle rattles on the fire, and the smell of weak broth seeps into the air. You'd give anything for a proper hearth, but a bowl of something warm feels almost holy. It's funny how quickly the human body adjusts. Yesterday you were dreaming of feather beds and roaring fires. Tonight you're grateful for straw and a blanket that doesn't smell entirely like goat. Maybe survival isn't about comfort, it's about editing your expectations. You stretch your legs, straw crackling beneath you, and listen to the sounds of the camp winding down. The rhythmic rasp of whetstones on blades. A few soft prayers. Someone quietly strumming a lute, the melody stumbling but gentle. It's strange the tenderness that lives inside hardship. For all the mud and misery, the camp feels alive, its own breathing organism pulsing in sync with the firelight. You pull your cloak tighter and think about what might come tomorrow. Marching, fighting, freezing again. But for now, you've won a tiny victory: warmth, stolen from winter, woven from grass. Outside, snow starts falling again, light and slow, brushing the tent like a whisper. You close your eyes and feel the straw mold to your shape, cradling you in its rough kindness. The air smells faintly of smoke wool and something ancient survival itself. The secret to staying warm in a medieval tent wasn't strength, it was strategy. You didn't fight the cold. You dressed smarter than it did. You sit hunched beside the fire pit, trying to decide how many layers of clothing count as enough. The veterans around you look like walking haystacks, swaddled in so many tunics and cloaks they can barely bend their knees. But then, one grizzled archer face, half hidden by a frost-crusted beard, leans over and says something that sounds insane. If you wear too much, you'll freeze faster. You stare at him, wondering if the cold's finally cooked his brain. Then he grins. Trust me. Sweat kills faster than swords. It's not a poetic exaggeration, it's solid medieval science. Once you sweat inside your armor or your layers, the moisture turns cold. The same linen shirt that made you toasty an hour ago becomes a personal ice trap by nightfall. So you learn to balance. Too few layers and you shiver. Too many and you might as well sleep in a puddle. You start with the basics, a linen undershirt to wick sweat, though no one in the Middle Ages would have used the word wick. They'd just say, keeps the stink away. Over that, a wool tunic, coarse, scratchy, but the warmest thing before central heating was invented. Wool was magic. It insulated even when wet, trapped body heat and was practically indestructible. The poor soldiers wore rough-spun brown or gray. Knights could afford dyed versions, deep crimson, blue, green. But under the dirt and frost, everyone's wardrobe eventually turned the same color, mud. On top of that came the cloak, not just a fashion statement, but a lifesaver. Worn like a portable blanket pinned with a brooch at the shoulder. Cloaks were the medieval equivalent of a sleeping bag and a coat combined. Many were lined with sheepskin or rabbit fur, soft, light, and scandalously warm. The wealthiest knights sometimes had theirs trimmed with sable or fox. You make do with something that smells suspiciously like goat. And then there's the headgear. Helmets off, hoods on. A woolen coif, basically a snug cap that ties under your chin, keeps your ears attached to your head. You tuck your nose and mouth into the folds of your cloak and breathe through the fabric. It warms the air, but also makes you sound like you're permanently sighing. Which, in fairness, you are. The layering trick doesn't stop there. Socks, or rather, strips of linen wrapped around your feet before you pull on your boots. It's a humble but brilliant technique borrowed from Roman legions and passed down through centuries. 2 layers of wrapping, one to absorb sweat, one to hold heat. The poor used old cloth. The lucky used felt. And every man, rich or poor, prayed he wouldn't wake up to find his toes turned to stone. A soldier across from you, a talkative fellow from Flanders, jokes that sleeping in winter is like cooking yourself in reverse layer too fast, and you steam. Layer too slow, and you're raw. You laugh because he's right. He demonstrates his own secret stuffing straw between tunic and cloak for extra insulation. It looks ridiculous, but he swears by it. Some even lined their armor padding with dry moss. Whatever worked. You think of medieval chroniclers describing soldiers during the siege of Tournai, or the winter at Harfleur, where freezing rain soaked through tents, and men shivered so violently they couldn't hold their spoons. The survivors weren't the strongest, they were the driest. A warm man fights longer, one commander supposedly said. It's not hard to imagine why layering mattered. The human body becomes your only furnace when you're living in a world made of ice and wind. You start to notice every tiny leak of heat through sleeves, boots, even the gap between glove and cuff. So you tuck everything in binding cloth around your wrists like a personal treaty against frost. Someone passes around a jar of animal fat, a crude but effective waterproofing trick. You rub a bit into your boots and cloak, grimacing at the smell. But soon it works. The next gust of wind feels less cruel. You start to understand how medieval soldiers became practical philosophers. When every object in your life has to justify its warmth, you stop caring about appearances. As night approaches again, the camp looks like a field of moving mounds. Men huddle close to fires, cloaks, drawn tight steam rising from wet boots and breath. The air hums with quiet conversation. Someone hums a tune about home. You shift your hood, pull your cloak tighter, and find that perfect balance, warm but not sweating. In the grand scheme of medieval warfare, layering your clothes might seem trivial compared to battles and banners. But when the cold creeps in, it's the small details, the wool thread, the pinned cloak, the tucked sleeve that save lives. Out here, survival doesn't shout. It whispers through fabric. By now you've figured out the rhythm of cold, when to move, when to rest, and when to surrender to the crackling promise of fire. Every tent has its own version of warmth, and every soldier has his own method of cheating death by degrees. Yours begins with smoke. Fire in a medieval camp is both miracle and menace. You need it like you need breath, but feed it wrong, and you'll wake up coughing your lungs out, or worse, not at all. Too small a flame and you freeze. Too big, and the tent becomes your funeral pyre. You sit crouched near the flap, watching your comrade prod a small pit lined with stones, coaxing embers from a pile of half-frozen wood. It's hard to imagine a world where firewood itself was a weapon of survival. Soldiers scavenged constantly fallen branches, broken wagon pieces, even old shields if the night was cruel enough. In England's winter campaigns or the snows of Bohemia, wood was worth more than silver. There were records of men stealing tent poles just to burn them. A knight could lose a battle and shrug but lose his fire. That was personal. You kneel close as the smoke curls upward, bitter and gray. It clings to your cloak, your beard, your lungs. Your eyes water until you can't tell if it's from emotion or combustion. You understand why medieval camps always smelled like a combination of soup, sweat, and smoke. It wasn't hygiene. It was history cooking in real time. Veterans knew how to build a fire for sleep, not for show. The trick was the trench pit, dig deep, line it with stones, light the fire low, and cover it with a thin layer of ash and dirt. The ground stays warm for hours, radiating heat like a primitive mattress warmer. It's a delicate balance. You want the warmth, not the flame. Too much air, and it smolders back to life. Too little, and it dies. That was the nightly gamble. You glance around at the other tents. Some soldiers use braziers, small metal bowls filled with charcoal glowing like tiny red suns. They're safer, but limited. Once the coals fade, the cold comes crawling back like a debt collector. Others light fires outside and angle their tents to catch the reflected heat. You can spot the clever ones. Their tents glow faintly orange, while yours still sulks in shadow. One archer, a broad-shouldered fellow from Yorkshire, tells a story between sips of weak ale. During the siege of Rouen, he rasps, we built fires under barrels half filled with sand, warmed the whole tent. Of course, the captain said it was wasteful. He chuckles, then shrugs. Better waste wood than freeze solid. You nod, because that's a truth every soldier learns. Authority fades fast when the frost hits. The smoke grows heavier. You shift closer to the flap, waving it toward the hole at the top of the tent, the so-called vent. The word's generous. It's just an opening that lets half the smoke out and all the heat escape. You cough, eyes stinging, and remember that the balance between breathing and warmth is never perfect. Medieval living was full of contradictions like that. The very act of survival came with a side effect. Outside, the wind catches sparks from the fires, scattering them across the camp like orange snow. The night smells of live wood ash and faint sweetness from boiling broth. Fires flicker in the darkness, little circles of light, where men gather to tell lies and swap warmth. You can tell who's been in the field longest by how close they sit to the flames. The rookies crowd right up. The veterans know better, keeping their boots just far enough to stay dry. You lean back, feeling the glow against your face. For a fleeting moment, it almost feels civilized, this circle of heat in an uncaring landscape. So then, you can see why even the poorest foot soldier guarded his fire like treasure. Some commanders even assigned men to watch over them through the night, lest one careless gust leave 100 tents freezing by dawn. There's a saying passed between camps: the fire is loyal to no man. It gives freely and takes just as fast. Tonight, though, it's merciful. The flames settle low, licking the stones with a quiet hiss. You stretch your fingers toward them, feeling life trickle back into your skin. The man beside you starts humming a song about spring, about home. You join in quietly, both voices weaving through the smoky air. The sound feels warm in its own way, like another kind of fire. You realize then that heat isn't just something you make. It's something you share. As you crawl back to your tent, the last of the smoke clinging to your cloak, you lie down and still smell the fire in your hair. It's inescapable but comforting proof that at least for tonight, you've won the oldest battle of all man against the cold. The night deepens, and with it comes the truth. Every soldier eventually learns warmth is a team sport. You can build the best fireware, every layer you own, and still freeze if you sleep alone. Out here, survival isn't about glory, it's about proximity. You shift over to make room as another soldier crawls into the tent. His breath fogs in the dark, his cloak stiff with frost. He mutters something about the wind being a jealous wife it always finds a way in. You laugh softly, but you both know what comes next. The veterans rule 2 men to a blanket 3 to survive. There's no shame in it. Modesty freezes faster than flesh. Every campaign since the dawn of armies has rediscovered this law. Romans, Crusaders, Vikings, they all shared heat. Even chroniclers of the Crusades noted how soldiers lay together as brothers beneath one covering, lest the cold take them by stealth. It sounds poetic until you try it yourself and realize it's less romance, more logistics. The key is to get comfortable without losing dignity, which is impossible, so you stop trying. You press back-to-back layers of wool and sweat between you and let human heat do its quiet work. Slowly, the biting cold in your limbs begins to ease. The tent feels less like a tomb and more like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. Someone outside sneezes, then swears in Latin. Someone else coughs. A dog curls up near the embers. Life in a winter camp is noisy in the strangest way, snoring, shuffling, the occasional fart muffled by wool. You almost smile because misery has its own music. You remember a story an old knight once told by the fire. He'd fought in Edward Thurn's Welsh campaigns, trudging through mountain snow so deep it swallowed their horses. We learned to sleep like spoons in a drawer, he'd said, eyes distant. Close enough to hate each other by morning, but alive. You thought he was exaggerating. Now you believe every word. The closeness brings its own awkward choreography. One man shifts, the other follows. Someone inevitably steals all the blanket. You wrestle it back without a word. It's amazing how quickly survival turns strangers into brothers. In this fragile bubble of canvas, and breath rank and title mean nothing. Knights, archers, squires, all reduced to the same shared warmth. You find yourself thinking how universal this must have been across centuries. Inuit hunters, Mongol riders, even Napoleonic soldiers all found themselves curled beside comrades under the same frozen sky. The methods changed. The instinct didn't. Warmth shared is warmth multiplied. After a while, conversation starts to fade. Voices turn to murmurs, then silence. You can feel your own breathing slow sinking with the man beside you. There's something oddly reassuring about that rhythm, 2 lives measuring time together. The tent creaks, the wind hums, but the world inside stays steady. Still, comfort never lasts long. Someone's elbow finds your ribs. You mutter an oath, shove back, and both of you laugh quietly. It's the kind of laughter that keeps frostbite away, a reminder that humor, too, is a form of heat. Even the medieval chroniclers admitted it. During the siege of Calais, soldiers were said to tell jokes just to warm their spirits. You're starting to understand what they meant. Not everyone in camp has the luxury of a shared tent. The scouts and sentries sleep alone or not at all. You think about them now, those pale silhouettes pacing the perimeter, stamping their feet to keep blood moving. Every so often, one of them stomps by your tent, the sound heavy and hollow. You whisper a quick thanks to whatever saint protects fools and frostbitten guards. You wake briefly in the middle of the night. The fire outside has burned low, and the air bites harder again. But this time, it doesn't reach you. The shared warmth holds steady a small defiance against the void. The man beside you snores softly, his breath puffing against your neck. You don't even mind. It strikes you just before you drift off again that this strange, uncomfortable intimacy is what makes armies possible. Not weapons, not banners, just the stubborn willingness of men to keep each other alive. The histories remember kings and victories, but they never mention this, the quiet heroism of shared breath in the dark. The tent shifts with the wind straw rustles beneath you. And for once, you don't feel like prey to the cold. You're part of a small temporary warmth, a fragile human constellation glowing under the endless frozen sky. They say an army marches on its stomach, but in winter, it sleeps on it too. You wake before dawn, drawn from half-dreams by the smell of something bubbling over a campfire. It's thin, greasy, and questionable, but in a world of frost, even that scent feels like hope. The man tending the pot stirs slowly, face pink from the heat. Breakfast, he mutters, or medicine, depending on your courage. The warmth of food, that's the next weapon in your battle against the cold. It's not comfort, it's strategy. A well-fed soldier is a warmer soldier. The medieval army's menu didn't exactly inspire poetry, but it kept hearts beating coarse, bread salted, pork, peas, onions, a little ale. Everything boiled into what could generously be called stew. Most nights it tasted like salt and regret, but it worked. You crouch beside the fire cup in hand as the cook ladles out a portion thick with mystery. It's hot enough to sting your tongue, and you don't care. Heat from the inside is the best kind. It spreads outward, filling your chest, radiating down to your fingers. After days of stale rations and frozen air, that feeling is intoxicating. During long campaigns, medieval soldiers learned the art of eating for heat. Spices were rare, but prized. A pinch of pepper, a sliver of garlic, a drop of wine, luxuries that turned soup into survival. Some lords even issued daily rations of spiced ale or mulled wine in deep winter, believing it kept the blood lively. The logic wasn't wrong. Alcohol dulled the chill, even if it also dulled judgment. You imagine some poor knight waking up half drunk, half frozen, wondering whether warmth or wisdom had been the better choice. Across the fire, a burly sergeant explains his personal secret hot broth before bed. Keeps the stomach working, he says, tapping his belly, and that keeps you warm. Another soldier swears by onions roasted in ashes, someone else by rubbing goose fat on their chest. Every camp had its own folklore of warmth, half superstition, half biology, all desperation. The best cooks in the army weren't artists, they were chemists of survival. They knew which foods burned longest inside you. Bread and beans for endurance fat, and broth for slow warmth. Even a piece of hard cheese could feel like a miracle. Soldiers would sometimes save the last bite just to hold it in their mouth before sleeping, pretending the flavor itself could chase away the cold. You glance down at your hands, rough and red from the wind, and realize the body is its own furnace. Feed it wrong, and the fire goes out. That's why commanders obsessed over supply chains as much as strategies. When the English army marched toward Agincourt in 1415, the biggest fear wasn't French knights, it was hunger. Starving men don't swing swords, they shiver. Modern soldiers might get energy bars and hot rations, but the principle hasn't changed. Even today, climbers on icy peaks eat fatty meals before sleeping. The calories burn slow, turning food into midnight heat. You smile at the thought people have been tricking their bodies this way for 1,000 years. The cook shoves another bowl into your hands. Eat, he grumbles. You can curse me later. You take it gladly. The steam hits your face, fogging your lashes. Around the fire, men begin to thaw, their faces glowing orange in the light. For a few minutes, the camp looks alive again, an island of warmth floating in the frozen dark. You think of armies in colder lands, the Teutonic knights in Prussia, trudging through snow so deep they had to melt ice for water. Chronicles say they mixed wine with hot honey, a concoction both sinful and holy. The Scandinavian foot soldiers, their own trick fish stew thickened with butter and rye. The Mongols boiled fermented mare's milk, which probably tasted like revenge, but kept them alive. Everyone found a recipe for survival. When the pot runs dry, the cook sits back satisfied. "That'll do," he says, wiping his brow. You feel it too, the warmth humming under your armor, the slow return of sensation to your toes. Food, simple as it seems, feels like a small rebellion against nature itself. You settle back on your straw bed, licking a spot of broth from your glove. The tent smells of smoke grease and humanity, unpleasant, but somehow reassuring. You've learned something the cold never understood. Warmth isn't just made by fire or cloth. It's built from the inside out, spoon by spoon, breath by breath. Outside, the snow starts again, soft and silent. You close your eyes, the echo of the meal still glowing in your chest. Hunger might be the oldest enemy of mankind, but for tonight, it's been defeated temporarily, gloriously, by a pot of questionable stew and a few good men who refuse to freeze quietly. The camp quiets after supper, and the sounds of survival fade into something almost peaceful. You lie on your straw bed, belly warm, from stew ears tuned to the strange symphony of a medieval winter night. Somewhere nearby, a horse stomps softly in its tether. Someone coughs. A few tents away, two men are arguing about who snores loudest. And beneath it all, the wind hums a slow, patient tune reminding everyone who's really in charge. The cold has its own personality, quiet, cunning, easily offended. When the fire dies, you can feel it creeping back in, inch by inch, as if reclaiming lost territory. It seeps through the seams of the tent, brushes, your cheek slips under your blanket. You've learned not to fight it too hard. The secret is to accept it, to let the cold exist without letting it win. You listen to the camp breathe. Hundreds of men wrapped in canvas and courage, all trying to do the same impossible thing, sleep. There's a strange beauty to it, this collective exhaustion. Even the knights, so proud by day, snore like commoners by night. Every soldier, no matter his station, eventually becomes a bundle of wool and noise. A few tents over, someone starts humming. It's not a song you recognize, but it carries through the cold like smoke, warm and a little sad. Others join in softly, off-key, but sincere. For a moment, the camp feels human again, an island of flickering voices against the endless white. You close your eyes, half listening, half drifting. The sounds tell stories if you know how to hear them. The muffled scrape of armor being adjusted means a sentry's getting ready for the watch. The faint clink of metal near the fire means someone's boiling water, probably to fill a wineskin for warmth. The rustle of straw means someone's rolling over, chasing a comfortable spot that doesn't exist. Then there are the less poetic noises, the groans, the sneezes, the teeth chattering in rhythm. The cold levels everyone, strips away dignity, title, and distance. In this frozen democracy, everyone suffers equally. Even the commander's pavilion, bigger, yes, but just as drafty, creaks under the same wind. You wonder how many soldiers across history have lain awake like this, listening to their own breath fog the air. The crusaders in their desert nights suddenly freezing when the sun fell. The Swiss pikemen camped on snowfields in the Alps. the Ottomans besieging Vienna, wrapping their heads in layers of linen against the frost. Every army leaves the same footprints. Tense, smoke-straw silence. You shift onto your side, your breath forming little ghosts in the air. The tense fabric shivers with each gust. Outside, the fire pops once, twice, then sighs into embers. For a heartbeat, you imagine what the camp must look like from above a field of tiny glowing dots, surrounded by a sea of darkness. If the stars had ears, this would be the sound they'd hear 1,000 men pretending to be asleep, waiting for morning to save them. A dog barks somewhere at the edge of camp. You open your eyes, the bark echoes, then fades. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's something. Out here, every sound could be either. You tighten your cloak around your shoulders and focus on your breathing. In, out. Slow and steady. You feel your heartbeat slow, your body sinking into the straw warmth pooled between layers of fabric and fatigue. There's a kind of meditation to it. The cold simplifies things. You stop worrying about battles or banners. You think only of warmth, of rest, of staying alive until the next sunrise. It's a clarity most people will never know, a strange calm that comes only when comfort is impossible. You remember something a priest once told the camp before battle: God listens closest to cold men. At the time you laughed. Now you understand. When you're frozen, hungry, and exhausted, prayer isn't a performance. It's a whisper of hope into the wind. You murmur a few words yourself, though you're not sure who's listening. The camp settles deeper into stillness. The snow outside softens every sound until the world feels padded, muted, asleep. Even the wind grows gentler, as if tired of its own cruelty. You close your eyes again. For the first time in days, sleep comes easily, not warm, but peaceful in its own fragile way. If someone asked what the medieval night sounded like, you'd tell them this: not battle cries, not drums, not horns. Just men breathing in the dark, keeping the frost at bay, one sigh at a time. The kind of silence that belongs not to history books, but to life itself, the long, slow rhythm of existence between wars. Dawn doesn't really arrive, it just sneaks in. The light slides over the horizon, dull and gray, painting everything the color of cold steel. You open your eyes to find the tent rimed with frost, the fabric stiff and glittering like chainmail. Your breath comes out in clouds. Every muscle feels like it's been forged overnight, stiff and sore from hours of staying perfectly still. You roll over and immediately regret it. The straw beneath you crackles with ice, and your blanket feels more like a plank than cloth. The man beside you grunts awake, his beard sparkling with tiny icicles. Morning, he mutters as if the word itself is a complaint. You grunt back, too cold for sentences. Outside, the camp stirs reluctantly. You hear the groan of wooden carts, the clatter of pots, the brittle sound of frozen canvas being shaken. Every movement has that brittle edge of winter, sharp, slow, deliberate. It takes twice the effort to do anything, even breathing. But medieval armies didn't get snow days. If the king said march, you marched, even if your boots were closer to sculptures than shoes. You crawl out of the tent, and the world greets you like a slap. The air tastes metallic, dry as iron. The ground is a mosaic of footprints, frozen mid-step, each one rimmed with frost. Horses snort steam into the air, soldiers stomp and curse to wake their limbs. Somewhere, a trumpet sounds the morning call, its note cracking like a frozen reed. You stretch, or at least try to. The joints protest, the armor feels heavier. But somehow you're still here, and that victory. You think of all the nameless soldiers who didn't wake up after nights like this. Chroniclers rarely mention them, but the truth lingers in the margins of every campaign record. So many perished of cold. It sounds tidy on parchment, less so in person. A man from another tent limps past, holding his hands under his arms for warmth. His fingers are white stiff, frostbite or close to it. You help him to the fire pit, where a few glowing coals cling stubbornly to life. The cook tosses in more wood, and soon the smoke curls upward again, blue, fragrant, alive. It's strange how quickly misery becomes routine. You look around and see a kind of unspoken rhythm to it. Men thaw their gloves over flames, scrape frost off shields, pour hot wine into tin cups. Someone jokes that he's half ice, half breakfast, and the others laugh, not because it's funny, but because laughter is warmer than silence. Even the horses look resigned to it, tails flicking at invisible flies, breath pluming like steam engines before their time. A stable boy rubs one's muzzle and mutters, "You and me both, eh?" The animal exhales, and for a moment, you can almost believe it answered. The sun creeps higher, but doesn't help much. It's a pale thing, a rumor of warmth, not the real article. You remember how months ago this same light meant sweat and shade and easy sleep under open skies. Now it just reveals how beautiful frost can be when it's trying to kill you. The tents glitter, the trees shimmer, and the river nearby gleams like glass. Even the misery looks magnificent from far enough away. You pull your cloak tighter and rub your arms. The man beside you, the same one who shared your straw bed, catches your eye. "Still breathing?" he asks. "Barely," you answer. He grins, teeth chattering. "Then we're winning." He's right. In winter campaign, survival was a kind of battle all its own. Every morning you woke up breathing meant you'd outlasted nature by another day. The victories that made it into the chronicles were fought at dawn with frostbitten fingers and smoke-stung eyes. As you sip the last of the warm ale, you glance toward the distant tree line. The horizon wavers with faint movement, men breaking camp, hoisting gear, ready to march again. You wonder how they do it, how anyone keeps walking through this endless gray. But maybe that's what soldiers have always done. Keep walking because stopping means freezing, and freezing means fading into history as just another unnamed casualty of winter. Someone calls your name. Time to move. You stamp your feet, flex your fingers, and throw your cloak over your shoulder. The tent collapses under your hands, the frost on its surface showering you like glittering dust. For a second, the morning light catches it, and it almost looks like confetti, like the sky itself applauding your persistence. You sling your pack, take one last look at the patch of flattened straw that kept you alive, and feel something small but powerful stir inside you. Pride, maybe, or just relief. Either way, it's enough to make you smile, even as your breath freezes midair. When you've slept on frozen ground long enough, comfort stops being a dream and becomes a memory. You march through the morning mist, boots crunching over frost, to the camp now, nothing but faint smoke on the horizon. The cold has shaped you in ways the sword never could. Your fingers are rougher, your back aches like an old cathedral beam. And yet, there's a strange peace in knowing you've learned the oldest lesson of war, how to endure what doesn't want you alive. The road ahead gleams with ice. Men move in silence, cloaks, drawn tight breath, puffing out in gray clouds. Somewhere, a crow calls a single sound against the quiet. The army stretches for miles, a moving forest of canvas bundles and creaking wagons, its rhythm steady, patient, stubborn. Survival has its own kind of discipline. You glance down at your gloved hands. The leather is stiff with frost, the seams lined white, but beneath it, your skin is warm enough. You think back to that first night when the tent felt like punishment, the straw like mockery, and the cold like something personal. Now it feels familiar, almost companionable. You've made peace with discomfort. That's the true art of the medieval soldier, not glory, not valor, but adaptation. When they write about campaigns in the chronicles, they'll mention dates and kings, not the small details that actually won the war. A handful of straw, a shared blanket, a bowl of broth, the clever angle of a tent flap. History remembers the banners. The cold remembers the bodies that held them. But you walking here among them remember the small miracles, the warmth borrowed, the breath shared, the fire that didn't go out. The sun struggles upward, thin and pale as old parchment. You can feel it on your face, barely there but real, and you close your eyes for a moment just to feel its weight. Around you, the men trudge onward, some humming softly, others muttering prayers or curses. You realize that everyone here carries the same quiet victory inside them. They've outlasted the night. They've proven, if only for a few hours, that human stubbornness burns hotter than winter. You pass the quartermaster's wagons, barrels of ale, frozen solid bread, as hard as stone meat buried under frost. The men hauling them walk like ghosts, wrapped in layers of wool and willpower. No one complains now. Complaints take breath, and breath is better spent staying alive. The road winds through a field of frost-tipped grass, and for a heartbeat, it's beautiful, so still, so bright, that it almost looks painted. The irony isn't lost on you. Misery can be breathtaking if you let distance do the framing. A knight rides past armor, glinting like ice. He nods at you not as lord to soldier, but as one cold man to another. For once rank has frozen flat, you stop briefly at a stream to refill your water skin. The surface is half ice, half liquid, a mirror cracked by the season. Your reflection stares back, eyes rimmed with fatigue, face roughened by cold, but alive. You smile faintly. That's enough. You scoop a handful of water, numb and pure, and let it sting your lips awake. Later, when the army halts to rest, you drop your pack and sit in the snow. The tent poles dig into your shoulder, the rope coils against your leg. You could set it up again, rebuild your little fortress of straw and hope, but instead, you just sit there breathing the sharp air, feeling the quiet. The world has stopped fighting you for a moment. Around you, soldiers light new fires, laughter crackling among the flames. Someone sings about spring again, how it always comes, eventually. You know he's right. Winter ends, wars end, everything ends. But what lingers are the habits of survival, the tricks you learned, the warmth you shared, the patience you earned one frozen night at a time. You lie back, cloak spread beneath you, eyes on the pale sky. A raven circles overhead, black wings cutting across the light. You think about how many men came north like this, armed, armored, convinced they were fighting for glory, and ended up wrestling the cold instead. Maybe history's greatest battles weren't fought with swords, but with breath. The wind softens for a moment, brushing across your face. You pull your cloak over your chest and let your eyelids fall, your body finally remembering the rhythm of rest. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughs. Somewhere else, someone snores. The camp, the army, the world, all of it folds into one long exhale. You let yourself drift, not into dreams of home or warmth, but into something quieter. Gratitude, maybe, for the fire that didn't go out, for the friend who shared his cloak, for the simple miracle of being here, breathing under the same cold sky that has tested men for 1,000 years and found them astonishingly still willing to live. You survive the cold, the frost, the sleepless nights. But now comes a different kind of battle, the one against your own smell. Because in a medieval army, dirt wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Lice, rot, and disease marched alongside every banner. So how did soldiers caked in mud and sweat manage to keep themselves clean while living like moving fortresses of filth? The march has been long, the sun merciless, and the dust clings to you as faithfully as your shadow. You've sweated through linen leather and chain mail, and the result is a smell so potent it could qualify as a weapon. You'd think that after days on campaign, the first thing a soldier would crave is food or rest, but no, it's a bath. The problem is, on a medieval battlefield, that's about as rare as mercy. You peel off your armor piece by piece, each one sticking to you like an accusation. The undertunic linen, meant to keep your skin from chafing, is soaked and stiff. Your hands are black with grime, your hair plastered to your head. You can't tell if the dark streak on your arm is mud or yesterday's blood, and you're too tired to care. Around you, hundreds of men look exactly the same, tired, crusted, steaming in the chill air, like overworked horses. Cleanliness isn't just about pride, it's survival. Every bit of dirt, every damp patch of cloth, is an invitation to infection. The medieval soldier learned that the hard way. Sweat plus metal equals rot, and rot has no mercy. A man could survive an arrow only to die a week later from a rash gone wrong. So you learn small tricks, simple, brutal, effective. Scrape grime off with a dull knife. Rub down with a rag soaked in vinegar or wine. If you're lucky enough to be near a stream, dunk yourself head first and pretend it's rejuvenation, not frostbite. When chroniclers wrote about knights shining in armor, they forgot to mention the smell trapped underneath. During Edward III's campaigns in France, some soldiers reportedly washed their underclothes in the same buckets used for cooking stew. Hygiene wasn't luxury, it was strategy. A clean body healed faster, marched longer, and didn't turn into a disease vector. Armies that ignored that learned quickly, usually through epidemics that spread faster than gossip in a tavern. You look around the camp and see everyone improvising. One man scrapes his nails with a dagger. Another uses a handful of sand as an exfoliant. Someone else pours wine down his forearms, muttering that if it's good enough for his stomach, it's good enough for his skin. The scene looks half ridiculous, half ingenious, a medieval spa, minus the luxury and scented candles. And the smell, dear heavens, the smell. Imagine wet wool smoke, animal fat, and unwashed humanity all mixed together and cooked under armor for 3 weeks. That's not exaggeration, that's a Tuesday in campaign life. There's a reason medieval soldiers often carried herbs like rosemary or mint in their pouches. It wasn't fashion, it was defense. A sprig of rosemary stuffed into a helmet could make a man believe briefly that he was human again. It's easy to laugh now, surrounded by the comforts of modern plumbing. But think about it. Would you walk into battle knowing the nearest bathhouse is 2 weeks away, and your soap is made of rendered animal fat and ashes? These men did. Every march meant grime. Every river crossing meant a choice: wash and freeze or stink and live. Neither felt noble. One chronicler during the Crusades described soldiers boiling their shirts to kill the lice, which sounds heroic until you realize they were also boiling them in their cooking pots. Yet there was method in the madness. Boiling killed parasites and softened the cloth again after days of wear. In the absence of soap, heat was their cleanser, smoke, their perfume, resignation, their cologne. You rub at a patch of dried mud on your forearm and realize it's not mud at all. It's dried sweat and dust forming a second skin. You scrape it away with a thumbnail, revealing raw pink flesh underneath. Clean enough, you murmur the medieval version of self-care. The camp buzzes with similar rituals. A squire fetches water in dented buckets. Knights line up for a rinse like children at a schoolyard pump. One poor man, desperate for cleanliness, strips down and rolls in the snow. His friends cheer, then curse as he steals their blanket to dry off. You can't help laughing even through the exhaustion. And yet, there's something strangely noble about it. For all their filth, medieval soldiers understood the importance of keeping clean as best they could. Dirt wasn't just discomfort, it was weakness. Clean meant strong. Clean meant alive. So you take another handful of cold water, splash it on your face, and gasp as it burns like fire. It's not pleasant, but it feels like proof you're still human beneath the grime. Somewhere nearby, someone starts a fire to boil more water. The air fills with steam and the faint tang of wood smoke and sweat. You sit back dripping, shivering, but faintly proud. The filth will return tomorrow, it always does. But for now, you've won one small, glorious battle. You no longer smell like defeat. When the army finally reaches a river, you feel a kind of joy that has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with stink. The water glints under the sun, clear enough to tempt even the most superstitious soldier. It might as well be holy because for the first time in weeks, you get to feel clean. Of course, there's a catch. The same river that promises salvation could also deliver plague. The veterans know this, and they treat the water with suspicion, like it's smiling too much. You stand on the bank and watch the first few brave souls wade in, laughing, splashing, cursing, as the cold bites their skin. Within minutes, the river looks like a washing line of humanity men, scrubbing shirts, beating armor with stones, and dunking themselves like bread in stew. You hesitate for a moment. The last time you bathed in a river, you nearly froze solid, but the heat and the smell have won. You strip down, teeth clattering as the wind hits you, and step into the water. It's cold enough to make you forget every sin you've ever committed. You gasp, shout, and then laugh, the kind of laugh that only happens when pain feels almost holy. Washing in rivers wasn't just about vanity, it was one of the few ways to stay alive. Clean skin meant fewer infections. Clean clothes meant fewer lice. And even though most soldiers had no idea what bacteria were, they knew filth led to fevers. The medieval world didn't have germ theory, but it had pattern recognition. You splash your face and watch the dirt swirl away in brown clouds. The water smells faintly of earth and iron, cleaner than you expected. A few men downstream are filling barrels while others wash their horses. Someone's trying to scrub his helmet with sand, muttering a prayer that it won't rust by morning. It's chaotic, noisy, and weirdly beautiful. Not everyone bathes, though. Some soldiers, especially the older ones, avoid the water entirely. They've learned through bitter experience that cold rivers can steal your strength faster than any sword. Better dirty than dead, one grumbles, wrapping his cloak tighter. You can't blame him. Pneumonia was a frequent guest in these parts. A priest walks by shaking his head at the sight of naked men laughing in the river. The Lord does not command such vanity, he says. Someone splashes him. The Lord presumably looks the other way. Religion and hygiene have always had an uneasy truce. In some monasteries, bathing was seen as indulgent. On campaign, it was a necessity disguised as sin. You think of the Crusaders marching under the blazing Middle Eastern sun. Chronicles describe them bathing in the Jordan River, some claiming to feel their souls cleansed along with their bodies. Others, less poetic, complained that the water gave them dysentery. The line between blessing and curse was thin and very, very wet. The soldiers on your side of the river begin to treat the experience like a festival. Someone finds a sliver of soap, more likely animal fat, mixed with ashes, and starts sharing it around. The lather barely forms, but everyone acts as if it's magic. You rub some on your arms, the rough texture pulling away days of grease and grit. It's not luxury, it's rebirth. There's a kind of community in this chaos. You hear jokes shouted across the water, insults traded like friendship tokens. Men laugh at how pale they've become, comparing who's more sunburned, who's lost more hair, who smells the least like old cheese. For a few brief moments, the war disappears. There's only cold water, warm laughter, and the sound of armor being beaten clean. A squire upstream yells in alarm, and the river's current has snatched his linen shirt and carried it downstream. Instantly, half the camp erupts in laughter. Someone fishes it out with a spear, holding it aloft like a trophy. Cleanest man in camp. He shouts, and the soldiers cheer. Humor is half the hygiene here. Without it, you'd drown in despair faster than in water. You finish rinsing off and crawl back to shoreskin, red and tingling. The air hits like knives, but for once it feels good. You sit on a rock drying in the sun, watching steam rise from your skin. Around you, others are spreading clothes over bushes, armor glinting where it catches the light. The whole camp smells faintly better now. Smoky metallic, still human, but less apocalyptic. A knight nearby wrings out his tunic and sighs. "We'll stink again tomorrow," he says. You nod. He's right. But for now, you smell like water and wind, and that's enough. You've learned what every medieval soldier learns sooner or later. Cleanliness isn't a permanent state. It's a brief, glorious ceasefire between man and the dirt that always wins in the end. If the river is the soldier's cathedral, then soap, when it exists, is the closest thing to a miracle. You fish a small lump from your pouch, a rough gray pebble of animal fat, and lye that looks like something scraped from the bottom of a cauldron. It smells faintly of smoke and tallow. To anyone else, it's unpleasant. To you, it's worth its weight in silver. Medieval soap isn't the silky bar you imagine from modern bathrooms. It's gritty, oily, half-caustic, and occasionally painful. Made by boiling animal fat with ashes, it's a kind of chemical truce between cleanliness and suffering. In richer towns like Marseille or Savona, proper soap olive oil blended with soda ash was prized enough to trade for coin. But on campaigns, soldiers had to improvise. If you were lucky, the quartermaster carried a few bars. If not, you made do with what the field provided: sand ash vinegar and a prayer. You pour a little water into a bowl, crumble some of the soap, and rub your hands together. It doesn't lather. It grinds. The smell of fat clings to your skin. Even after rinsing, a strange irony: you've technically cleaned yourself, but now you smell faintly like roasted mutton. You sigh. Progress comes in smells, apparently. The soldier beside you watches your efforts and grins. "Ain't real soap," he says. "Real soap makes the dirt cry." He holds up a pouch of fine gray powder. Ash and sand. Works better, trust me. He sprinkles some onto his arms and scrubs until his skin shines raw. You flinch just watching him. But when he's done, his forearms are nearly clean, reddened, yes, but free of grime. It's brutal efficiency, the medieval way. Soap making was considered both art and danger. Too little lye and the result was greasy. Too much and it burned skin. Some soldiers learned to test it by dabbing a bit on their tongues. If it fizzed or stung, it was poison. If it just tasted foul, congratulations, you had usable soap. You try to imagine explaining this to a modern chemist and can't decide if they'd faint or laugh. When supplies ran low, soldiers turned to substitutes. Wood ash mixed with urine made an alkaline paste strong enough to strip oil from armor and occasionally flesh. The Romans had done it 2 centuries before, rubbing their bodies with oil and scraping it off with strigils. You wonder if some medieval knight ever thought of reviving that method, only to realize no one had the luxury of enough oil to waste on their own skin. One night, Sir Gilbert, a man you've started to think of as permanently irritated, swears by vinegar baths. Kills all manner of corruption, he insists, splashing the sour liquid on his legs. It does technically, though. It also stings like confession. Others follow his lead, turning the camp into a cloud of salad dressing. By evening, you all smell like a strange tavern menu meets smoke and pickled despair. It's funny how the pursuit of cleanliness creates its own kind of chaos. Men experiment constantly, rubbing with sand to scour their armor, and skin-washing hair with fermented ale, brushing teeth with crushed charcoal or ground herbs. No one knows exactly what works, but everyone swears by something. And every so often, one trick actually does. You rub what's left of your soap into a rag and wipe down your chainmail. The gray suds slip between the links, leaving streaks of dull shine. The smell of fat lingers, but it's better than rust. Maintenance is hygiene too. A dirty soldier might die from infection. A dirty sword might cost him faster. As the sun dips low, you sit by the fire with your cleaned gear drying beside you. It's strange, every wash, every scrub feels like reclaiming something small but vital. Dignity, maybe. You run a hand through your hair and realize it no longer sticks together in greasy clumps. That's worth a silent cheer. A younger recruit plops down next to you, holding a bucket filled with muddy water. Soap's gone, he grumbles. Used sand instead. Feels worse. You nod knowingly. Pain means progress. He looks doubtful, but you see him smile anyway. That's the secret keeping morale alive through shared misery. You can almost imagine the historians centuries later romanticizing the chivalric life-shining armor, noble vows banners waving. They'll never mention this part, the soldier hunched over a bucket, scrubbing mud off his arms with ash smiling because the dirt finally lost a round. The fire crackles, and you watch the steam rise from your drying cloak. It smells strange, but not offensive. You'll take it. After all, in medieval warfare, cleanliness wasn't beauty, it was defiance. Against disease, against despair, against the filth that came with living too long among men and death. And tonight, as you stare at the shapeless bundle that used to be your linen tunic, you start to understand why. The thing's stiff with salt, streaked with grime, and smells like it's plotting against you. But here's the problem. You only have one spare. And both are filthy. Welcome to Laundry Day Battlefield Edition. In modern life, you toss clothes into a machine and walk away. Out here, washing is a battle of its own. You fill a wooden bucket with cold stream water, drop in your shirt, and immediately regret the decision, because the water turns black faster than ink on parchment. You poke it with a stick. It hisses back. The men around you laugh because they all know this struggle. Clean clothes are a fantasy. Less dirty clothes are victory. You strip down to your breeches and get to work kneeling beside the water. There's no soap left, of course, so you improvise sand for scrubbing ash, for lifting grease, a handful of herbs, if you can find them. The veterans say that rosemary helps, but you suspect they just enjoy smelling less like despair. You scrub the fabric against a rock, beat it with your fists, and rinse it until your arms ache. When you lift it, the water drips out gray, then brown, then finally clear. That's as good as it gets. Laundry in the medieval sense isn't just hygiene, it's triage. Each soldier becomes his own laundress, though you'd never call it that out loud. In grander armies, there were actual washerwomen camp followers who handled the endless mountain of sweat-soaked linen. They boiled clothes in cauldrons over open fires, stirring them with long poles like soup. Boiling wasn't for cleanliness alone. It killed lice, which were as loyal to soldiers as their shadows. You can always tell a veteran he's the one standing closest to the fire, dropping his shirt in without hesitation, even if it comes out the size of a child's tunic. You remember hearing about the siege of Calais when English soldiers went weeks without washing because every drop of water had to be rationed for drinking. Men grew so filthy that when rain finally came, they stripped and danced in it, laughing like children. You think of that now as your own laundry hangs from a branch, dripping in the cold air. Cleanliness out here feels like celebration. A fellow soldier, older and perpetually unimpressed, walks by holding his trousers at arm's length. They stood up by themselves this morning, he grumbles. Figured that was a sign. He dunks them into the stream with a sigh and adds, "If God wanted us clean, he wouldn't have invented armor." You laugh because he's not wrong. The mixture of sweat oil and leather polish that collects under a suit of mail could repel a saint. Even the nobles suffered. Chronicles mention knights paying servants to wash their padded gambesons, the thick quilted armor worn under steel. After weeks of wear, those things could practically walk on their own. Some were so infested with lice and fleas that washing them required soaking in boiling vinegar. The smell, witnesses said, could slay a mule at 20 paces. You silently thank the heavens you're not rich enough for that particular misery. You wring out your tunic and spread it near the fire to dry. The fabric steams, stiffening as it warms. Around you, the camp smells faintly of wet cloth and wood smoke, which by comparison feels like perfume. The men joke, passing around a jug of ale as they wait. Smells almost civilized, someone says. Another snorts. Don't jinx it. When the clothes finally dry, they're rough and scratchy, but you pull them on anyway. The fabric feels strange, light, crisp, almost brittle. You stretch your arms and grin. For the first time in days, you don't itch. The feeling of clean linen against skin is pure bliss, even if it'll last only until tomorrow's march. One of the squires nearby has tried an experimental method, hanging his clothes near a smoke pit instead of washing them. The logic is sound. Smoke kills bugs and masks odor. The result, he smells like a burnt sausage. The men make sure to remind him of this every few minutes. Still, it's not a bad trick. Some even claim that smoke acts as a sort of invisible armor, warding off pests and spirits alike. You lie back near the fire, your freshly cleaned shirt rough against your neck, but wonderfully dry. The stars shimmer faintly above the tent line, and you think about how even the smallest act, washing a shirt, scrubbing a collar, can feel like reclaiming humanity in a world built for brutality. No one writes songs about laundry, but maybe they should. As you drift toward sleep, the night hums with the sound of rustling fabric, the soft flapping of clean shirts strung between tents, the hiss of water poured on coals, the faint laughter of men who, for a few hours, smell less like soldiers and more like people again. You pick up a razor, not to look handsome for a tapestry, but because the seams of your shirt are moving. That's the moment every campaigner recognizes the crawl, the itch that laughs at, scratching the realization that your closest companions aren't comrades, they're lice. Clean skin is nice. Deloused skin is survival. So you sharpen steel on leather, say a quick prayer to Saint Roch, patron against plagues, because why not, and get to work before the little army on your neck recruits reinforcements. Barber surgeons orbit every camp like practical saints with bad jokes. Their kit is simple razors, shears a comb with teeth so fine it could pick secrets out of hair, and a flask of something sour, usually vinegar, sometimes wine watered down to the point of sadness. They move from tent to tent, trimming beards, buzzing scalps, and tugging knits free with a patience that could shame a monk. No one calls it vanity. Everyone knows a shaven head means fewer hiding places for trouble. Think of it as the medieval buzz cut, less style, more strategy. You sit on a crate while the barber drapes a rag over your shoulders. The blade is cold, the air colder, and you can feel the heat of your body rise as hair falls. He works quickly, flicking the razor clean on a strip of linen, then runs a night comb through what's left. It squeaks. He holds the comb up to the light, studies the tiny harvest, and dunks it in a bowl of vinegar with a satisfied grunt. Better drowned than fed, he says, as if delivering a sermon you've heard before. Lice are equal opportunity tyrants. Chronicles call their aftermath camp fever, the kind of sickness that spreads faster than news of payday. No one knew the names behind it, but they knew the pattern. Men grow weak, hot, and useless, and an army that's scratching is an army that's losing. So you fight with the tools at hand. Boil what you can. Burn what you must. Hold your sleeves to the candle flame and watch the seams go still with tiny pops. Would you dare do that with your best shirt? Out here, you do it without blinking. The barber pours a little vinegar over your scalp and you hiss. It stings like truth. He follows with a pinch of crushed rosemary and wormwood rubbed between his palms. The tent fills with a sharp green smell that feels cleaner than any blessing. Herbal wisdom travels faster than banners, rosemary, lavender, and rue to scent clothing. Tansy tucked into collars. Mint leaves crushed and rubbed behind ears. Does it kill pests sometimes? Does it make life bearable always? Across the way, a knight debates whether to keep his beard for dignity or shear it for sanity. Helmets and beards have a rocky marriage. Sweat mats hair mats filth, and filth breeds trouble. Many split the difference: trimmed beards, clean necks, short hair under the coif. In garrison towns, rules can be strict. On the road, nature writes the regulations. Henry Fivedi's ordinances fussed over order and disease. The subtext was obvious: sick men don't win battles, say, and dirty camps get sick. You rinse your mouth with watered wine, standard issue mouthwash, when water looks suspicious, and rub your gums with a pinch of salt and charcoal, because a barber's duties don't stop at hair. He displays a little cloth bag of dentifrice like a magician, revealing his finale: powdered charcoal, crushed sage, a rumor of cinnamon if he's feeling rich. You scrub with a rag, wrapped around a finger until your mouth tastes like a hearth. Romantic? No. Effective enough. Medieval hygiene coasted on, good enough the way a cart coasts downhill with gratitude and squeaks. Superstition rides shotgun with science in every age, and this one is no different. A veteran swears that shaving on Fridays keeps fever away. Another ties a saint's medal into his cap to dissuade the small devils. Everyone nods. No one argues. Someone else claims a ring of iron heated and passed over garments chases the corrupt airs. You watch them and think of modern locker room rituals, same species, same hopes, different centuries. If it calms the mind, it helps the body. The barber's helper tends a pot set just off the firewater, thinly sour with vinegar. Shirts bob and sway like pale fish. He prods them with a stick, lifts one, rings it, and hangs it near the smoke. Smoke is the camp's second barber, an invisible hand that dries cloth masks, stink, and persuades fleas to seek different employment. Some swear by sulfur thrown on coals for a quick fumigation. The smell could empty a church, but the garments do quiet down afterward. Desperate times invent desperate aromas. You roll your shoulders newly light and feel that peculiar relief of skin meeting air without a mat of hair in between. The itch hasn't vanished, but it's retreated sulking along your cuffs and collar, where it will meet the candle later. The barber dabs a bit of goose fat on a razor Nick grease as barrier and ties a scrap of clean linen over it. He is part janitor, part medic, part morale officer. Armies move on bellies, yes, but they collapse on rashes. A young archer ducks into the tent sheepish. Got the crawl, he mutters, lifting his coif to show a constellation of red marks. The barber gestures to the crate. First time, the archer nods. Then learn the litany: cut short, boil long, smoke often, and don't lend your cap to friends unless you hate them. Laughter spills out, gentle, tired, grateful. Humor is soap for the mind. It loosens what misery hardens. By twilight, the camp looks like a festival of small recoveries. Caps steaming by the fire, shirts slung over spear hafts, men with newly blunt scalps rubbing vinegar like victory into their hairlines. You breathe in rosemary smoke and the faint, clean bite of metal. It's not perfume, but it has the same effect, a reminder that you are still a person and not merely a container for armor and orders. You rub your thumb along the fine teeth of the enite comb, slide it into your pouch like a charm, and settle your coif back over your now bare scalp. The world outside keeps marching, but the world inside your shirt has been disciplined for the night. You lie down on straw that suddenly feels kinder, and for the first time in days, the itch quiets enough to let your thoughts drift someplace that isn't your collar. You never thought breath could feel heavy, but on campaign, it does, like you're exhaling the entire pantry. After weeks of salted meat, sour wine, and smoke, your mouth tastes like an argument that no one wins. Clean skin helps you sleep. A clean mouth helps you wake without snarling at the sun. So you sit by the embers with your kit, a rag, a pinch of powder, a twig that used to be a branch and is now a toothbrush by decree. Dental care isn't a luxury out here. It's risk management. A bad tooth can turn a good soldier into a useless one in 3 days flat. You've seen it happen: cheek swelling, eye watering, temper shortening. The barber surgeon shrugs, wiggles a pair of iron forceps, and everyone suddenly remembers an urgent appointment somewhere else. Better to spend 5 minutes each night doing the medieval version of minty fresh than meet the iron beak at dawn. Your powder looks humble charcoal from last night's fireground, with a little salt and sage. Some men add crushed mint or rosemary for courage. If someone in the quartermaster's chain has friends in a port city, you might get a precious pinch of cinnamon or clove. A single clove pressed against an aching tooth can feel like a miracle spice, as anesthetic carried half a world to save a single night's sleep. You tip a bit of the powder onto your rag, wrap it around a finger, and scrub. The taste is campfire and garden, not unpleasant once you surrender. Grain does half the job for you. The bread is coarse here, stone-milled, a little sandy, so each bite is like brushing with crumbs. You can feel the grit polishing places the rag misses. It's not romance, but it works. That same grit, though, wears enamel thin over years, and you've seen older veterans with flattened teeth that look like they were filed by time. Everything in campaign life is a bargain today's fix, signed against tomorrow's bill. For the twig, you favor willow or hazel. You chew one end until it splits into a soft brush, then dip it in wine or brine and work along the gums. The motion is slow, small, more meditation than task. You trace the seams where meat hides and trouble grows, spit, dip, repeat. Rinsing with wine is standard part, antiseptic part, excuse. If wine is scarce, salt water does the job without the sermon. Vinegar, the old friend from yesterday's delousing, shows up again in tooth care lore, cut with waters swished, grimaced through endured. If you're lucky, a priest traveling with the host will carry a tiny vial of rosewater or myrrh from a city apothecary. One drop on the rag, and suddenly your mouth smells like a feast day. Men trade favors for that drop. The barber, not to be outdone, keeps a scrap of alum to rub on bleeding gums and a bit of mastic resin to chew for fresh breath. You roll a pellet between your teeth and feel the jaw calm the resin, tightening the gums like a quiet order to stand at attention. Stories circulate by the fire, the way smoke does curling and sticking. Someone swears an Italian physician recommended powdered coral and ground oyster shell for whitening. Another claims a Moorish doctor wrote about metal picks for scaling tiny hooks to scrape the stone that bread builds. You don't know the names, only that somewhere far away people think about teeth for a living, and you're grateful to borrow their ideas secondhand. Superstition hums alongside practice. A pikeman swears you must clean before sunrise on Thursdays to prevent toothworms. The older men nod the way people nod at weather, not convinced, not willing to risk it. You keep your face polite and your powder practical. Faith is a sky. You still need a roof. You ask yourself a quiet question as you work. What does clean taste like? Tonight it tastes like sage and charcoal with a whisper of wine. The gums sting, a little proof that you found what needed finding. You breathe out and test the air. Better. Not a garden, but not a battlefield either. The barber passes by and sees your twig. He approves. Chew sticks honest, he says, then shows you a goose quill toothpick he's sharpened to a fine, careful point. He cleans around a back molar with a delicacy you wouldn't expect from hands that also carry saws. Soft on the gum, he explains. Hard wood breaks bone splinters. Quill bends. He's part poet when he talks tools. You tuck the lesson away with your twig. Sometimes someone brags about rubbing teeth with ground salt alone. It works but roughly, and you've learned to go gentle. Gums are banners. You want them high and red, not torn in the wind. If bleeding starts, a pinch of powdered alum or a dab of honey and salt quiets it, though honey brings flies and promises cavities if you get generous. Moderation sneaks into every conversation like a thin-lipped clerk. You think of kings with gold-threaded napkins and physicians on call. And then you remember that breath is democratic. Even a lord can clear a room. In truth, some nobles keep better kits, silver toothpicks, perfumed waters. A servant trained in the art of polite nagging. But you've seen a stable boy with cleaner habits than a knight, and a knight who learned humility from a toothache. Pain teaches fast. Pride learns slow. Across the fire, a friend winces hand to jaw. You hand him a clove and a strip of linen dusted with charcoal. Press and breathe, you say. He does, eyes fluttering as the spice numbs the nerve. He gives you a look you've seen after battles, the look a man gives another when the world stops shouting for a minute. He'll sleep now, and sleep is medicine with no apothecary. Before you lie down, you'll rinse once more, slow and steady, then run the quill along the quiet places where food tries to build fortresses. You spit into the ashes and watch the foam disappear. It feels ceremonial, ending the day's eating with the day's erasing. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough to keep the iron beak at bay a little longer. You settle back on the straw, mouth cleaner, breath, less quarrelsome tongue, no longer coated with the entire week's menu. The tent smells of smoke and wool, but your own breath doesn't add another voice to the choir. You realize how strange it is that something as small as a twig and a pinch of powder can make the night easier. Then again, campaign life is nothing but small mercies arranged in a row, each one just big enough to carry you to morning. Armies don't just lose to swords, they lose to the smell they ignore. You learn this fast nose first. A bad camp stinks like surrender kitchens upwind of the latrine's horse's tide, where runoff gathers men relieving themselves wherever the dark looks friendly. That's not inconvenience. That's strategy failed. So the first order after tents go up isn't polishing armor. It's pointing a shovel at the earth and asking very politely for a trench. Veterans call it smell diplomacy. You negotiate with the wind the way you'd negotiate with a prince, careful, respectful, and always thinking about tomorrow. Latrines go downwind and downstream, far from the cook fires and water barrels. Dig long slit trenches knee-deep, or better line them if time allows, and keep a stack of earth and a spade beside each one. Use cover move. It's not glamorous, but neither is dysentery. Discipline is heat for the body. Sanitation is armor for the gut. You stomp out the path to the chosen ground with a sergeant who has the moral authority of a bishop and the vocabulary of a farrier. He points his staff. Here, not there. If you can smell the soup, you're too close. The rule spreads faster than rumors of pay. The trench becomes a place with rules cloak off the ground belt, held shovel ready. Some captains post a boy with a bucket of ash or quicklime, if they're lucky enough to have it. A handful tossed after each visit sweetens the treaty between camp and soil. You've read ordinances Henry Fifth's for one fussy about lines, tents, horses, fire safety. The subtext is always health. Armies die by logistics long before they die by lances. A well-managed latrine line means fewer men on their backs, with the flux fewer hands dropping spears to clutch stomachs. You don't need germ theory to see the pattern. You just need eyes, a nose, and a week of mistakes. By dusk, the pits are busy, which is precisely why there's a second rule. Courtesy shifts. No one lingers. There's a broom of twigs, a bucket of water cut with a dash of vinegar, and a stack of straw for wiping because comfort is a dream, and leaves are for summer. You dab your hands in the sour water afterward, rub them dry on a rag, hung for that purpose, and feel almost civilized. The man behind you mutters a prayer of thanks to whoever invented the concept of away from camp. You murmur, Amen. The kitchen crew loves you for this. Keep the latrines downwind, and their stew smells like food, not a moral test. Kitchens have their own diplomacy, fat drippings buried or burned offal dealt with, before flies write their laws. The cooks keep lids and pots and ladles clean, and you start to see why the best of them walk the camp like petty kings. A cook can start or stop a plague faster than a captain can plan a charge. Night complicates everything. Men wander. The wind shifts. That's when the chamber pots appear wooden buckets with tight lids, and the piss trench right outside the tent line shallow and quick to refill. The idea is simple. Keep the main pits for solids, keep the edge trench from turning the pathways into a swamp, and keep your boots as friends. A lad does the rounds with ash at dawn, and the camp smells merely human again. You think of Acre and Rouen, and all the besieged cities where waste turned streets into weapons. Field camps can become those cities if you get lazy. Chronicles don't write it vividly. They're polite, but between the lines, you can hear the coughs, the cramps, the weeks lost to the camp's own mistakes. A wise quartermaster treats a shovel like a banner. The horses get their own system dung collected, piled, and moved beyond the lines. If there's time, a shallow compost pit straw, dung, a sprinkle of earth. Kept tidy, it won't betray you. Neglected, it becomes an alarm bell the enemy can smell on the wind. Scouts report by nose as well as by eye. You'd be surprised how far a foolish camp announces itself. Sometimes the ground is stone, the weather stubborn, and time short. That's when you improvise barrels cut in half and half buried. Wicker screens for dignity. A cart set at the edge of camp with a plank and a stack of ash, portable propriety. When it's truly desperate, Men carry a small bag of dry earth to cover what the morning cannot. The goal is always the same: nothing exposed, nothing near water, nothing the wind can carry to dinner. Do you want an interactive problem to solve while the kettle simmers? Here the wind comes from the north, the stream runs east, the kitchen sits central. Where do you dig first trenches? If you pointed to the southeast corner beyond the horse lines and well past the water fill, you've earned your sergeant's nod. If you said behind the cook fire, the cook will chase you with a ladle. The language of rules spreads no washing mess tins at the water source. Draw upstream, wash downstream. No dumping broth into the path. Pour it into the waste pit so the dogs don't start visiting. Keep a lid on the slop buckets. Flies are spies. Wash hands vinegar if you can, ash if you must before you touch bread. The man who ignores that last one eats alone for reasons both sanitary and social. Morale rises when odors fall. It's not poetry, but it's hard truth. A camp that smells of wood smoke, horses, and stew feels like an army. A camp that stinks like a midden feels like a mistake. You notice how voices soften when the wind is kind, how men sing more when ash has done its work, how laughter creeps back when paths are dry and boots come back clean. The senses are soldiers too. Keep them on your side. By moonlight, the trenches look like quiet lines of punctuation at the edge of your temporary city commas that keep sentences from running into each other. You drop the last spadeful of earth, press it flat with your boot, and breathe through your nose. Wood smoke, broth, leather, a distant hint of rosemary, and nothing else. You'd call that victory if the analysts had a column for it. They don't, so you settle for sleep that doesn't wrinkle its nose at you. As you finally settle into clean straw and a camp that smells of wood smoke instead of regret, something else wakes the seams. Not the tent seams. The seams of your shirt, your hose, your gambeson, quietly hosting a tiny garrison that never pays, never prays, and always eats on time. You don't see them at first. You feel them, the slow, needling advance along the collar, the sudden cavalry charge behind the knee, the steady occupation at the waistband. Congratulations, you're once again vital to the secret economy of lice. Here's the part: no minstrel sings lice are logisticians. They prefer cloth to skin until mealtime, marching the stitching like roads, laying eggs, knits along warm borders where the fabric kisses your body. Necklines, cuffs, waist seams, armpits, crotch gussets, the world's most predictable map. Their campaign calendar is short. A knit can hatch in about a week, and each new recruit joins the feast with the punctuality of a quartermaster. If you're wondering why a fresh haircut didn't end the itch, there's your answer. Hair helps, yes, but fabric is a kingdom. Veterans develop a ritual that looks almost tender: the seam inspection. After evening rations, you turn your shirt inside out and run thumb and forefinger along every stitch. Feel for the grit that isn't grit, the pearly bead of a knight stuck like a bad decision. Pop, flick, pinch, scrape. Lanterns tilt, men squint. Someone hums to keep his temper. A little pile of gray-white specks gathers on an upturned shield. It's not pretty, but it's proof you're winning inches, even when you can't win miles. Heat is the truest ally. Anything that touches bare skin meets hot water first, hotter if fuel allows. Lacking a cauldron, you improvise stones heated in the fire slide into a shallow trench. Wet cloth laid over them hisses as steam curls up, and there, under the hiss, you hear the tiny snap of defeat. On dry nights, garments pass over coals on sticks close enough to bake the seams, not so close they combust and leave you telling a sheepish story at breakfast. There's a thin line between deloused and a cautionary tale. When fuel is tight, you smoke them out. Cloaks hang in a conical shelter of shields and spears, while a small pot of green wood smolders beneath rosemary and juniper tossed in when you can spare it. The smoke worms through cloth, stinging eyes and pride, but persuading tenants to vacate. Is it perfect? No. But morale always rises when a man inhales rosemary instead of his neighbor. Count that as medicine. Want a quick problem to mull while the shirts steam? If you must choose one thing to treat first, hair, skin, or seams, where do you start? The seasoned answer comes fast: seams. Hair regrows, cloth keeps breeding grounds. Win the fabric and the scalp becomes skirmish, not siege. Camp fever, the vague, dreaded phrase in annals that swallows 1,000 specifics, rides on the backs of these little quartermasters. No one names the culprit here, but everyone recognizes the sequence: itching listlessness, sudden heat that no fire caused. Orders follow stations, for boiling stations, for shaving stations, for smoke. A captain with a sense of numbers assigns lice, watch the way another assigns pickets. It's not romantic, but it keeps the line standing. Buddy checks become as normal as sharpening a blade. You and a tent mate trade places under the lantern. He scours your collar while you comb his coif. He bakes your hose while you watch the cloth for scorch. Conversation turns practical: who has vinegar, who has ash, who has patience. The neat comb passes from hand to hand like a relic. Men bless it with jokes, because gratitude is easier when you laugh. A good comb has teeth so fine they nearly sing. You learn to pull it slow, steady, and wipe it often. Comb, rinse, in sour water. Comb again. Never rush the corners where seams meet skin. Then there's bedding. Straw is warmth and betrayal in equal measure. Fresh bundles arrive golden and clean. A week later, they whisper. You learn to fluff, rotate, and when luck smiles, replace. On a dry day, you carry the straw out and rake it thin in the sun, letting light and breeze do their small, kindly work. When the quartermaster is generous, a thin scatter of ash goes down before the new layer, a gray moat that buys you nights. If a sack is available, you stitch your straw into it. Even a crude tick makes inspection easier and burning simpler when the sack finally learns to bite. Not all tricks are grim. Some are almost elegant in their meanness. A strip of linen sewn as an inner sweatband around collars and cuffs catches the worst of the traffic. At week's end, the strip burns, while the shirt survives a removable battlefield. A narrow placket along the waistband becomes a sacrificial road the insects prefer. You bait it with a drop of tallow scented with rue, then feed the placket to the fire like a smug general. Science or folklore? Out here, the difference matters less than results. You begin to decode the day by itch. Morning itch points to bedding. Midday itch blames gambeson's seams. Night itch means hose. Fix the right thing at the right hour and you save fuel temper time. Men brag about their schedules the way nobles brag about horses. Boil at second bell, bake at dusk, smoke at prayers, says one. Another ties a knot in his belt. Each time he delouses a garment, 5 knots, 5 quiet victories. There's a cultural choreography to it, too. Songs appear, half joke, half instruction, little marching chants that remind men to turn cuffs, burn threads, share combs, never trade caps. Not your cap, not your louse, the sergeant barks, and the line laughs because it's easier than scratching. Caps become private property like secrets. Helmets still trade heads, which is why the coif beneath stays yours and yours alone. You notice how much calmer the camp feels after a thorough delousing. Voices lower, cards appear, the cook hums. It's the absence of buzzing under the skin that you're hearing. A quiet body forgives the world more easily. Cleanliness isn't an ideal here. It's a noise reduction. The barber passes, sees you roasting the seams of your hose, and gives the kind of nod men reserve for competent bridge building. In a place that records only battles and banners, that nod is its own medal. A final gentle truth settles in as you shake the last hot shirt. Cleanliness on campaign is never a finish line. It's a patrol. You don't win, you maintain. The moment you forget, the seams remember for you. So you fold the warm linen, slide it over shoulders that have learned the arithmetic of comfort, and tuck the night comb where your hand can find it in the dark without thinking. The straw rustles, the lantern hums, and the itch blessedly goes quiet enough to let your breath lengthen the way it does only when the enemy is somewhere else for a while. You figure out quickly that clean has two meanings on campaign, and the kind that keeps you alive, and the kind that lets your tent mates tolerate sitting next to you. Tonight is about the second kind in the theater of freshness. If you can't always win the war against dirt, you can at least confuse the enemy's nose. Welcome to the perfumer's aisle of a moving army, where every scent is improvised and every improvement counts twice, once for morale, once for flies. Start with the humble herb pouch. A scrap of linen becomes a sachet, a few stitches make a pocket, and whatever you can scrounge becomes treasure rosemary. If a cook will spare it time, if a hedge is kind lavender, if you're anywhere near a monastery garden. Mint, if the stream bank smiles. You crush a pinch between your fingers, breathe in the green, peppery breath of leaves, then tie the pouch to your belt or slip it into the neck of your shirt. It doesn't erase sweat. It teaches it manners. There's method behind the greenery. Medieval folk joked that rosemary sharpens memory, but soldiers prize it because it survives hardship better than most men. Woody, tough, fragrant, even when dried. Lavender folds sweetness into the mix and sneaks a little calm into a loud life. Mint fights in the mouth and on the cloth. Thyme is the bossy cousin. It climbs into stews and sleeves alike with the same energy. These aren't luxuries. They're morale measured in whiffs. Your neighbor swears by smoke as cologne. He stands downwind of a juniper branch, crackling on the coals, and lets the blue haze thread his cloak gambeson, even the padded liner of his helm. Juniper smoke beats back the smell of last week with a clean, resinous bite. On feast days, he tosses a chip of frankincense or a crumb of storax into the brazier church air on a soldier's budget. The cloak comes away with a hint of nave and candlelight. And for an hour, he walks like a man who owns a bathhouse key. If you're lucky enough to pass through a city, a street apothecary might sell rose water in a vial small as a thumbnail. One drop on a rag, a quick pass over beard and neck, and you no longer smell like a cooking fire in a tannery. If the quartermaster isn't looking, you'll risk a dab on the inside of your coif. That's the secret scent, the inside, not the outside. Fragrance on the surface blows away. Fragrance where heat lives lingers like a polite guest. The wealthier sort in the column talk about pomanders, little metal globes pierced with patterns and filled with herbs, musk, or citrus peel. You don't own such finery, but you understand the idea. A simpler cousin lives in your pouch an orange when fortune smiles, studded with cloves when fortune really smiles. You won't eat it. You'll nurse it for days, the clove oil seeping into your gloves and leaving you with hands that smell like winter markets instead of wet leather. There's also the soldier's bouquet, better known as the nosegay. A small knot of stalks, rue rosemary lavender tied with twine and stuck at your collar or in the brim of a felt hat. It does three things at once: perfumes your breath when you speak into it, discourages flies when you're eating, and tells your neighbor that you care enough not to smell like a collapsed barn. Call it courtesy with chlorophyll. Some of the older hands insist on vinegar posies, a strip of linen soaked in vinegar and tucked at the collarbone. It sounds like a dare until a hot march proves the point. The sour tampers down the worst of the sweat and keeps your shirt from plotting against you by noon. If you add crushed mint to the wet linen, the result is almost pleasant, like a salad you wear. Do you want a small practical puzzle? You've secured one sprig each of rosemary, lavender, and mint, and you can scent only one item before the march: cloak, coif, or shirt. Where does scent help most? The clever answer is the coif. Heat gathers at the head, the fabric sits near nose and mouth, and every breath carries the reward. The cloak gets wind, the shirt gets buried, the coif gets credit. Scent also rides in from the kitchen. You learn to borrow aroma from supper without stealing supper itself. Hold your cloak briefly above a pot, where onions and herbs are simmering, and the steam will lift a faint savory veil into the cloth. The trick is distance close enough to season far enough not to flavor tomorrow's breakfast with wool. The cooks pretend not to notice, which is their version of kindness. Priests contribute more than prayers. Blessed herbs from a feast day, sprigs of rosemary tied with a thread, make the rounds and end up hidden in boot tops and belt pouches. Is that medicine devotion or both? The line blurs sweetly when something smells like hope. On long Lent marches when meat is scarce and tempers are shorter than daylight, a camp that smells faintly of gardens feels like a truce with the season. Trade brings oddities. A merchant's pack opens to reveal powdered orris root, violet scented a whisper of ambergris, rare as dragons, or a cone of perfumed paste from the Levant, meant to be pressed in the palm and rubbed onto beard tips. You won't buy it, but you'll remember the smell the way a hungry man remembers a bakery, fondly, a little resentfully, and with renewed devotion to mint. Herbs creep under armor in other ways. A thin wreath of crushed thyme rolled in a strip of linen and tied loosely at the elbow makes the sweaty bend of the arm smell less like a stable. A pinch of lavender sprinkled into the straw of your pillow sack turns the first minute of sleep into a small holiday. Even horse blankets get a handful of rosemary. A calm horse smells safer than a nervous one, and your nose agrees. There's honesty in the best sense. They don't pretend to erase the life you're living. They frame it kindly. You still smell of smoke and leather and man, but the edges soften. Voices grow friendlier when the air does. The difference between a quarrel and a joke some nights is a twig of mint passed hand to hand before anyone says something regrettable. You watch the camp settle scented in tiny ways that only become obvious when they combine broth and juniper wool and lavender, wet earth, and rosemary. It isn't perfume the way lords mean it. It's perfume the way soldiers need it, a nudge toward dignity, a trick the mind plays to remind the body that it is not only a tool, but a person and persons deserve small kindnesses that travel well. You tuck your herb pouch beneath your collarbone, breathe once, and let the leaf green coolness settle your jaw and your shoulders in the same breath. By the time dusk folds itself around the camp, the chores of staying presentable have started to feel like more than chores. You catch yourself rinsing your hands in a little bowl before supper, not because anyone ordered it, but because the motion feels right. Cool water, a small pause, a breath. The gesture carries a memory older than the road, the basin by a church door, the priest's lavabo before Mass, the farmer scrubbing on saints' days with a seriousness that wasn't about dirt alone. Cleanliness isn't just comfort here. It's language one the body speaks to the mind. You've noticed how ritual sneaks into everything. The barber's slow pass of the razor along the scalp has the hush of a litany. The way men queue at the water barrel with cups lifted looks at a glance, like a procession. A lad sprinkles a finger of wine into a rinsing bowl for strength, and the older men nod. Not because they think star washings make miracles, but because the moment honors something. Even the habit of crossing yourself before plunging into cold water feels less like superstition and more like giving chaos a polite warning. The chaplain moves through the tents with his quiet parcels, whacks a little vial of holy water sprigs of blessed earth. herbs from a nearby chapel. He says nothing about filth. He talks about pride, patience, attention virtues that look suspiciously like hygiene when you put them to work. He'll bless a well with the same solemnity he uses for banners. And suddenly the long line at the bucket straightens itself. Voices soften, elbows stop jostling. Faith applied correctly is crowd control without barking. If you've marched east or south, you've also seen other languages of clean. On dusty roads, you watched men from another army pour water over hands and faces before prayer precise and unhurried their buddies, learning peace by repetition. You didn't have their reasons, but you borrowed their calm the way tidy motions settle noisy thoughts. The mind is a camp of its own. Order, outside order, inside. It works in every tongue. There's a rumor that knights in white mantles insist on set days for shaving and laundry, and whether or not the details are true, the logic is obvious. Orders survive on rules that turn private habits into public strength. Change your shirt trim, your beard, share the comb. Small obediences that mine discipline from boredom. If an army is a moving city, cleanliness is its calendar. You keep it, and the days stop blurring. You think, too, about bathhouses in towns you've passed, places of hot water, steam, and gossip, where cleanliness and company mingled so thoroughly you couldn't tease them apart. On the road, you imitate the spirit, if not the luxury, a pot of water heated just enough to sting towels shared like news, a laugh at the edge of the steam. You've learned that warmth makes people kinder, and clean skin makes them listen longer. If morale were a scent, it would be wood smoke and rosemary. Moralizing about filth is easy. Living with it is harder. You've seen spotless men with mean hearts and dusty men with gentle ones. Still, you can't deny the way a washed face changes a conversation. After a brutal march, two enemies might still glare. After a wash and a meal, they might trade a joke. If that sounds sentimental, ask the quartermaster. Fewer quarrels on clean nights, fewer thefts, when the camp smells like supper instead of a midden. Virtue may be clean hands and a pure heart, but the hands teach the heart by example. You notice how cleanliness shapes courage. A soldier who has managed to tame his corner of the world, a rinsed mouth, a combed head, a shirt that doesn't creep, walks a little steadier to the line. It isn't vanity. It's a promise to yourself that you're not only a blade and a bundle of nerves, not only a number in a roll, but a person who can order small things in a disorderly place. The mind borrows that feeling under pressure. If you can calm a seam, you can steady a spear. Would you risk a small reflection with your hands over the basin? When you strip away banners and boasts what's left of honor on campaign, some say it's bravery, others obedience. Tonight, you suspect it's attention. The careful noticing that keeps water uphill from the latrine ash, beside the trench comb, beside the candle. Attention is love with its sleeves rolled up. It turns staying clean into keeping faith, not with doctrine, but with the lives pressed shoulder to shoulder beside you. Stories circulate that saints once visited camps in disguise, testing whether men would share bread or spare a blanket. If you listen closely, you'll hear a quieter test happening every evening. Will you pass the bowl? Will you show a recruit how to trim a coif? You mark the wind and move the trench without being asked. You can polish a crest for hours, but nothing shines like a camp that doesn't make its own sickness. The chaplain lights a tiny taper and mutters a blessing that's really a thank you for water for soap when it exists for straw not yet quarrelsome. He sprinkles a drop on the bucket rim. A cook adds a branch of thyme to a pot. A boy hums while he lays out clean rags like altar cloths. None of it is grand. Yet the whole thing feels like ceremony that forgot its church and kept its meaning. You breathe in a gentler air, a quieter skin. and realize the lesson has settled without fanfare. Clean isn't just the absence of dirt. It's the presence of care. You tilt the bowl to catch the last light and wash your hands once more.